Morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Again, we're still waiting on a few more folks. We'll get this started in probably the next minute or so. Thank you for being patient with us. Okay. All right. Again, apologies everybody for the little bit of a late start, but thank you for joining us this morning for our October 27th grant funding workshop. My name is Jeff Schmidt. I am a program manager here at Arizona State Parks and Trails. Also have the rest of the Grants and Trails staff with me this morning. You guys, you want to introduce yourselves?
Sure. Good morning, everyone. I'm Mickey Rogers. I'm the Chief of Grants and Trails.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Alec Wilcox, the grant coordinator.
And I'm Matt Everhart, the State Off-Highway Vehicle Coordinator.
And also joining us this morning from the State Historic Preservation Office, Satara Gibbon.
Hi, everyone.
Satara,
sorry. Hi, I'm Satara. I'm the SHPO Grants Coordinator. I work with the Heritage Fund, Historic Preservation Grant Opportunity, and some ARPA funding.
Thank you, Satara. And thanks again, everybody, for joining us. Just a little bit of housekeeping before we get going. If everybody could, go ahead and place your phones or your computers on mute. We'd appreciate that. If you have any questions, you can go ahead and take yourself off of mute and ask them, but in the meantime, please keep yourself on mute. If you're like me, you don't like seeing yourself on camera, especially straining to view a PowerPoint, you can go ahead and turn your camera off as well. So this meeting's scheduled for about 2 hours. We likely won't need all 2 hours. But we plan to leave some time at the end of the meeting in order to answer any questions that you have. But again, if you have any questions, feel free to either take yourself off mute and go ahead and ask at any time, or go ahead and type them in the chat. We have the chat up. We're all kind of monitoring it, so we'll try and respond to those questions as we go. Chat's probably preferable because we will get the transcript of any of the questions that were asked in the chat. So that'd probably be the ideal method to ask any questions. But again, we'll leave some time at the end for any questions, and we'll actually hang out a little bit after the time in case we have any shy folks who don't really want to chime in with everybody else on the phone. So this slide shows just a little bit of kind of an overview of the topics we'll discuss today. I'm going to start by highlighting our various funding opportunities, including the Recreational Trails Program, the State Off-Highway Vehicle Program, the Land and Water Conservation Fund, and the State Heritage Fund, just to name a few. Following that kind of overview of all of our funding opportunities, we'll go ahead and discuss the application process. We'll discuss kind of the post-award process, as well as some tips on submitting and administering a successful grant application. And then again, we'll leave some time at the end for questions, but feel free to ask at whenever you have those questions. All right, so this first slide, this shows kind of a high-level overview of the entire grant, basically application, review, and approval process. As you see, the first step in the process is to reach out to one of us. Primarily for anything motorized, Matt will be your best contact. For any non-motorized, specifically Rec Trails program questions, I would be the best point of contact. And then for really any any general questions regarding any of our programs, Mickey is probably the best contact. Alec kind of gets more involved towards the end of the process when it comes time to start submitting reimbursement claims and status reports. But we'll discuss that later on. If you have any questions on any questions on the State Historic Preservation Grant, Cetera is definitely the best resource for that. So the first step, if you haven't already done so, you'd reach out to one of us to discuss kind of what you have in mind for your project. We'll discuss with you kind of some of the stipulations of the funding. We'll let you know if what you're proposing is even eligible. And then if so, we'll kind of provide the steps, initial steps of how to register for our online grant administration system and how to begin completing your pre-application. Pre-applications are required of some of our opportunities. It's not all of them. There is no pre-application for a safety environmental education program. There's a few other programs that do not require a pre-application. Pre-application, really just a lot of basic information, some real basic agency organization information, really a brief project description and a budget, and that's really all that the pre-application entails. If your application does require a pre-application, you'll go ahead, complete that information, and submit that to us. We'll get a notification from our online grant system that it's been submitted. We'll try and get in there within a couple of weeks and review what you've submitted. If everything appears to be in order, we will move you along to the full application. Again, you'll hop into the full application. You'll complete and submit that in the online grant administration system. We'll receive a notification that it's been submitted. At that point, we'll hop in there. We'll take a look. We'll try and do that within 2 to 4 weeks after submission, and let you know if all of the materials have been provided, if we have any questions, if we need any additional clarification. Again, if we discover any issues, any major omissions, we'll reach out for that information. A lot of the time, that's pertaining to either Section 106, NEPA, or some of the budget documentation, which we'll discuss a little more in depth later on in the presentation. So again, we'll try and get in there within 2 to 4 weeks, take a look, let you know if we need any additional information. If not, we will start the application through kind of a multi-level review and approval process. The first step is to send the application to our advisory committees and the State Parks Board. All of our non-motorized applications are reviewed by the Arizona State Committee on Trails, ASCOT, the Arizona Outdoor Recreation Coordinating Commission, AORC, and the State Parks Board. All of our motorized applications are reviewed by the Off-Highway Vehicle Advisory Group, OFAG, and then they are passed along to AORC and the State Parks Board as well. We'll kind of keep you in the loop when we enter this phase of the review and approval process. We ask that you or somebody that's familiar with your application be present for those meetings. Telephonically, virtually is sufficient. We administer so many of these applications that it's kind of hard for us to be intimately familiar with all of the proposed activities. So in case there's any questions from any of the advisory committees or board members, we'd like to have somebody that's familiar with that project on the phone so they can help us respond to any of those questions. Again, we'll keep you in the loop throughout that process. We'll fill you in regarding when these meetings are happening, and we'll send along agendas so you kind of know when in the meeting your project will be discussed. So once the application is reviewed and approved by the advisory committees and the State Parks Board, Depending on the funding opportunity, we will pass the application along for Section 106 and NEPA review. The funding opportunity is the determining factor of who reviews these projects. Any state-funded projects will be reviewed by the State Historic Preservation Office.
This meeting is being recorded.
Any federal funding opportunities will be reviewed by either the Arizona Department of Transportation Environmental Planning Group or the National Park Service. And again, we'll kind of keep you in the loop as we send those along. And if any of those reviewing parties have any questions or need any additional clarification, I will be reaching out to you to kind of coordinate that transfer of documentation. So once it's been approved by both the advisory committees, State Parks Board, as well as the appropriate reviewing party, this is kind of when Alec gets a little more involved in the process. He'll reach out to you with a draft project agreement. This is basically when your clock starts for reporting on these projects. We'll go ahead and send that out to you. Please review it, make sure we have all of your agency information correct, and please try and return that to us as quickly as possible. Again, we ask that you return that to us in 30 days. We've had more of an issue with this recently, with some of these, even the draft agreements, taking multiple months to be sent back to us, which really kind of extends the whole process and really kind of leaves you less time to complete the on-the-ground work. So we ask that you try and turn those around as quickly as possible. So again, we'll send you after the draft agreements, we'll send along a final project agreement through Adobe Sign. We'll ask whoever is authorized with your agency to sign that agreement and return it to us. Once that happens, we'll have our director sign the agreement, and then we will send along a fully executed agreement and an approval to proceed. Once you have both of those pieces in place, you can begin actually doing the on-the-ground work, expending funds. At that point, you'll be required to submit reimbursements as well as status reports. Status reports kind of varies the frequency in which they need to be submitted based on the funding opportunity. We'll get into that a little more when we discuss these specific funding opportunities. Kind of same thing with reimbursements. They need to be submitted at least every 6 months, but they can be submitted as frequently or infrequently as you would like. It really comes down to an internal agency preference and needs. So once your project's underway, again, depending on the funding opportunity, you'll have between 6 months and 3 years to complete all of the on-the-ground work. Once all that work is complete, you will be required to submit your final reports, your final reimbursement request, and any project closeout documentation. Once that's done, your project will be closed out, and you'll be ready to, if you'd like, submit another application for additional funding. Any questions on any steps of this process or the process as a whole? I know it's a lot of information.
So if they're, just to clarify, if they're nearing the end of a project, they can start an application for a continuation or a new project similar to, or that can start the approval process, but not necessarily be executed until that other one's completed, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I kind of misspoke there. So you can submit additional applications before a previous project is completed. But if they're using the same funding, we will not allow you to begin work on the second project until the first project has been completed and officially closed out. We will accept multiple applications. Any other questions on that process? Again, I know it's a lot of information. I don't expect everybody to understand it or fully comprehend it right now, but just want to share that with everybody, kind of what this looks like.
So to follow up on Jeff, if you're using federal funding, which is the LGCF program and the RTP program, if you apply now, don't expect your funds to be available for several months. So some of these projects won't be approved until next year, but we'll certainly talk with you about that, depending on what funding you're going to use.
Yeah, and that's kind of one of the things that we discussed during the very first step in the process. When you reach out to us to discuss your project, we'll kind of discuss some of those timelines and some of those requirements and kind of what the whole process looks like. Any other questions? All right, hearing none, we'll go ahead and move forward. So we'll go ahead and dive into our individual funding opportunities that we actually we are currently accepting applications. That's actually another thing that I missed during the first slide. We accept these applications on a rolling basis. There are no real application deadlines. There are certain times where we can submit certain applications to the National Park Service, but really, you can work on your application at any time. So the first program is the Recreational Trails Program, which provides funds to develop and maintain trails and trail-related facilities for both motorized and non-motorized trail uses. As you'll see here, eligible applicants include federal, state, county, local, and tribal governments. Nonprofits are also eligible to apply. You'll see this one a lot. This is a reimbursement grant, as are all of our funding opportunities. Basically means that you'll pay for an expense, you'll submit an invoice to us and a proof of payment, and then we will reimburse your account. We still get a lot of applicants that don't realize that these work on a reimbursement basis, so we like to try and hit on that as often as we can.
And a lot of things we're missing when we get these reimbursements is match. So every reimbursement requires the 5.7% match. We can't reimburse you unless you have the match in place when you request that.
So currently, for non-motorized projects, we're accepting applications up to $150,000. And Mickey, we may need to talk about that. I feel like may potentially increase that amount. Haven't had much interest to this point in really any of the rec trails opportunities. So we may discuss increasing that request amount, but currently for non-motorized projects up to $150,000, and for motorized projects up to $750,000.
The total amount of funding we have in this program is $1.82 million. So we have to obligate all those funds, and if we don't, we lose it. So that's why we may revisit the totals for motorized and non-motorized. And unfortunately, master plans for this program is not eligible expense. It has to be on the ground type of work, a trailhead or trails. Jeff will talk more about that when we get into the PowerPoint.
So as Mickey mentioned, this program requires a 5.7% match. The time frame to complete, it's between 2.5 and 3 years, basically depending on how quickly you return the signed project agreement to us. And then this program does require quarterly status reports. So the next program is our Heritage Fund Trails Program, which provides funds to develop and maintain trails and trail-related facilities for non-motorized trail uses. If you'll notice that the explanation of the Rec Trails Program and the Heritage Fund Trails Program are exactly the same, minus the Heritage Fund Trails Program is only for non-motorized trails. You also see a little bit of difference in the eligibility. This program is eligible to state, county, local, and tribal governments, as well as nonprofits. This is not eligible to, this is not open to any federal agencies. Again, this works on a reimbursement basis. Only for non-motorized projects. The maximum request for this program is a little bit lower than the Rec Trails program. It's only $50,000. It also requires a 25% match, which is a much larger match than the federal Rec Trails program. The time frame to complete these projects is the same, between 2.5 and 3 years. This program also does require quarterly status reports. These applications are reviewed by the State Historic Preservation Office, which means that the review and approval process usually moves much quicker. There are fewer hoops to jump through on this program, so just a couple of pieces of information for anybody who may be interested.
So to give you an example, if last week we had a board meeting where a Heritage Fund non-motorized project was approved. So if everything's in place, Jeff will send that information to SHPO for their review, and they take no more than 30 days. So the funding could be available the end of November, 1st of December. For the recreational trails program, that has to go through ADOT and Federal Highway. That funding may not be available until October, November, December of next year. So that's one of the big differences in these programs. Plus, you can get more money in the Rec Trails program. And Misty asked, would combating invasive grasses qualify for RTP? If the invasive grasses are trailing, yes, that's an eligible expense. So the recreational trails program comes from Federal Highway. The Heritage Fund comes from lottery state funds, so the state funds. Those are the funding they come from.
So we've received several questions about how our scoring works and how these are kind of reviewed and approved. So we just wanted to show this slide real quick and just briefly discuss how these non-motorized and motorized projects, at least the trail-related projects, are scored. So up on the PowerPoint is the current scoring criteria. And this is derived from our trails plan, which we do every 5 years. So basically how this works is if 10% or more of your total budget is dedicated to one of these specific criteria items, you will receive full points for that specific criteria. Anything below 10% of your total budget will basically just be prorated below that. So won't go too much into this. Just wanted to kind of explain how it works. And if you are overly concerned with your score, you want to, you're worried that the project will not be funded due to a low score, just reach out to one of us prior to submitting the application, or even after. We can work you through kind of how to move things around, how we can potentially help improve the score of your application. But honestly, scoring hasn't been too big of an issue recently because we haven't had really more applications than funding available. But if that becomes an issue, we'll certainly, we're more than happy to work with you on how to improve your score.
So there's a question, if a city wanted to create a heritage walkthrough, would this be appropriate fund and which to apply to develop it? I'm positive it's not eligible in recreational trails program, and we need more details, Kathleen. We can meet later if you want to tell us more details what this involves. But Rec Trails, I know, it may on the heritage, but maybe also eligible for environmental education. We need more information on what the tour would be.
So just some examples of what is eligible with this funding. Any trailhead facilities, shade structures, picnic facilities, any pipe rail fencing that kind of delineates a trailhead area, any restrooms, parking at a trailhead. These facilities developed with this funding need to be accessible, so just keep that in mind. Any trails, trail development, the bottom right-hand photo is actually a accessible trail out in Sholo. They're actually completing the second phase of that really soon. Yeah, and any features along the trail, any benches, any trailhead kiosks. This top right is a rolling ramp gate. The funding can actually be used to purchase land to develop trails as well. And then really for the Heritage Fund Trails Program, all non-motorized uses are eligible, and I guess the Recreational Trails Program as well. Any questions on the Rec Trails Program? All right, so the next program we will discuss is our Trail Maintenance Program, which is actually kind of a sub-program of the Recreational Trails Program. So trails maintenance projects address routine maintenance on existing trails. Eligible activities include tread maintenance, clearing of pathways, repairing drainage, replacing existing fencing, and is limited to minor reroutes of existing non-motorized trails. That's kind of the key right there. Minor reroutes of existing non-motorized trails. Only for non-motorized uses, we do have a separate motorized program that does pays for similar activities, which we'll cover at a later point. Again, eligible to federal, state, county, local, and tribal governments, as well as nonprofits. Works on a reimbursement basis. The max request for this opportunity is $50,000. Again, required 5.7% match. If you are a federal agency applying for these funds, 5% of that match must be from non-federal sources. Time frame to complete these projects is 1 year. And this few more stipulations. Work must be completed by a state contracted trail crew, which we pay directly. And this requires quarterly status reports. It's usually at this time we discuss our state contracted trail crews, but we are actually in the process of contracting with new crews, so we won't share that information right now, but as soon as that process is complete, we will make sure that that is included on future workshops, and we send that information out to anybody who's interested in the trail maintenance program.
So I want to clarify so that said it's a reimbursement grant. Things that we reimburse are costs. If you're having the trail crews put in signage, or if you're buying materials, then that you can reimburse that, but we pay the crew directly. And it's one of the programs, I think we only had one application last year.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we pay the crews directly. They can do the work. You can choose the crew. We should have those in place hopefully before the end of the year, and they'll do the work for you, and we pay them directly. And it's easy to get the 5.7% match. Sometimes the crews provide that match, so just be aware of this. It used to be one of our more popular programs. Now I don't know what's happening.
Yeah, I think it has something to do with kind of the review and approval process. I think back in the day, the reviewing parties were a little more lenient. So if these were existing trails, they would basically approve the application. They've been doing a little more thorough of a review, which I kind of think has slowed the process and potentially deterred applicants from applying. So we're going to try and work on things on our end, but kind of just some very extreme examples of what this funding can be used for. And again, it's for existing non-motorized trails. If a trail is built in an unsustainable manner, as long as a new section or a kind of a reroute along that segment, around that segment is surveyed, for archaeological cultural resources, you can apply for funding under this program. It will support some reroutes that improve the sustainability of the trail. So hopefully we can get a few more applications for this program this year.
So a nonprofit can apply on behalf of a federal agency. If you wanted to improve a trail on BLM or Forest Service, as long as they approve of the work, which most of the time they do, a nonprofit can apply on their behalf.
Yeah, thanks for adding that, Mickey. We, that is always an option, and really it's pretty simple on our end. Like Mickey said, all we really need is approval from the land managing agency. All right, so we will go ahead and keep moving. The next program, the next opportunity we'll discuss is the Safety and Environmental Education Program, which was developed to promote safety and environmental protection related to both motorized and non-motorized projects. Eligibility: federal, state, local, county, and tribal governments. Nonprofits are also eligible. Again, reimbursement grants. Maximum request is up to $10,000 and another 5.7% match. The time frame to complete these projects is a little bit different than some of the others. This is actually, you have 1 calendar year to complete these, starting on June 30th. So really, any projects that are submitted now, we will have them reviewed and approved by next June. So basically, once July 1st rolls around, you'll be ready to kind of rock and roll with those grants, and then you will have 1 full calendar year to complete those grants. These also require quarterly status reports. Similar to that program, but a state-funded program, is our Heritage Fund Outdoor and Environmental Education Program. Again, eligibility very similar, minus our federal partners. They are not eligible for this funding opportunity. And again, works on a reimbursement basis. One of the big differences is this program, the max request is $50,000. On the federal side, it's only $10,000. So a good deal more funding available from this program. As you'll see, the match requirement is a little bit higher. This requires a 10% match instead of the 5.7% match, but still, I'd say that's on the lower end of match requirements. You'll also have a little bit more time to complete these projects. These projects have between 2 years and 2.5 years. Again, depending on when the final project agreement is signed. These also require quarterly status reports. So just real quick, these are kind of what these projects are scored on: project need, youth involvement, audience served, the desired outcome, community support, who they serve, either local, regional, or states, the documented committed match for each project, and compliance on previous grants. All of those kind of go into the scoring of these applications. But again, we've received very little interest in this program, so scoring has not yet become an issue.
So as Jeff said, we had $500,000 available last year, and we weren't able to obligate all that fund, which rolls over to this year. So as he said, there's plenty of money in this program for outdoor environmental education related to trails.
I think these are 2 of the coolest programs that we have, probably the most flexible and diverse in terms of what they can be used for. So just a couple of things that we've seen recently. Some trail emergency markers on the top right, any signage, any maps, again, trail emergency markers, any outdoor kind of stewardship, environmental ethics type of messaging that would all be eligible for either of these programs. The bottom right, I think that is actually a trail development workshop where they teach folks how to properly develop trails, properly build, maintain. Again, we provided funding for some kind of outdoor environmental education programs. The city of Phoenix runs a program, Take a Hike, Do It Right. We provided some funding to them so they could really just increase their messaging, where this messaging was posted. Bottom right, we recently provided funds to the Verde Search and Rescue Posse for some of their volunteers to take mountain bike skills training classes so they can more safely and more quickly access some of these search and rescue type situations in more remote areas. As I mentioned, any kind of leave no trace, environmental stewardship, outdoor ethics messaging would certainly be eligible. This top right, I believe this was to get a class or students out into really just outdoor recreation spaces, natural environments. Again, one of the more diverse opportunities we have, and haven't seen a lot of interest in it recently, so love to see more projects come through the system for this funding.
So for this funding, if you apply for Heritage Fund Outdoor Environmental Education, if it doesn't involve ground disturbing activities, right after the board meeting, I think, Alec, we had several that were approved this board meeting last week. The agreements are going to go out this week, so these ones can start almost immediately after the board meeting. You can sign the agreement. And like Jeff says, there hasn't been a whole lot of interest in this program. And Misty, yes, it could fund an equestrian safety program. We have a lot of bike. I think we awarded a lot of bike programs last year.
Yeah, we did a couple of mountain bike safety / education programs, teaching school kids how to properly ride a mountain bike, and then all of those kind of environmental outdoor stewardship messaging kind of rolled into that training. So those are the types of programs we love to see. Any other questions on safety and environmental education or outdoor education programs? All right, Matt, you want to go ahead and take over for a few?
Absolutely. Happy to. So again, I'm Matt Eberhardt, the State Off-Highway Vehicle Coordinator here at State Parks. And with the Off-Highway Vehicle Program, we have 5 different categories of eligibility for Off-Highway Vehicle Recreation Fund dollars. The first of which is our competitive OHV grant. We're kind of working on our naming convention because it's been a little bit confusing in the past, but we essentially have supplemental off-highway vehicle grants as well as competitive off-highway vehicle grants. The first category here is the competitive. These are eligible for up to $750,000. They don't require any match. Obviously, it's recommended to have match with your project, which is easy enough to do with the volunteer rate being $29.95. And again, with these projects, the time frame is going to be anywhere from 2.5 to 3 years, depending on when your final project agreement is signed. We've been working towards having projects either end June 30th or December 31st. Because in the past, we've had some that would end on like March 14th, and trying to track information on when those end or start to set up your status reports and those types of things has just become a little bit more tedious. So you might actually get a little bit of extra time to complete the work depending on when your agreement goes out and when it's returned. With this competitive cycle, eligible for just about anything related to off-highway vehicle recreation. Trails, trail maintenance, support facilities like staging areas. We've seen several grants come in for staging areas being developed in some of the rural communities. Planning, design, engineering, land acquisition to build staging areas or to provide support facilities, a wide variety of things, fencing, signage, vehicle purchases, all kinds of different things related to off-highway vehicle use here. And these do require quarterly status reports.
And Matt mentioned it, these funds can be used for planning, which I think is one of the few, if not only, of our grant applications that can be used for planning.
Next up, we have our first supplemental OHV grant, and this is the small grant program, kind of designed to mirror the trail maintenance program with RTP, in which we would pay a trail crew directly to be able to go out and do work on a trail that's a pre-existing trail. Up to $100,000 here. They do require 5% match and would be required to be completed within 1 year. So we're looking for shovel-ready projects or trails that pre-exist, doing trail maintenance, those types of things. These require bi-monthly reporting because of the shorter time frame to complete. But again, kind of designed to mirror the trail maintenance program. And I think we've only had one of these grants out of Wickenburg submitted, so we're open. The next up, we have our emergency and mitigation funding. These are designed to be completed within 6 months. They require no match. Again, we can pay contractors directly depending on the need and what's going on. Designed for vandalism, fire, weather, or just unsafe trail conditions for the off-highway vehicle community. 6 month requirement, and then we could pay the contractors directly through our procurement processes. Again, with that shorter time frame comes shorter reporting period for status reports. Another note with these mitigation and emergency grants is that these are approved at the staff level, up to $100,000. So back in 2017, our State Parks Board gave us the authority as a Grants and Trails team to review these, do site visits, and work with the project sponsor to complete them within that 6 month time frame without needing a full board approval or going through the approval process. Obviously, they will have to go and be approved by SHPO before any work can be done, but the idea is that these are pre-existing trails or support facilities, so a lot of those clearances will already be in place and active.
And just to add on to that, eligibility, federal and state land managing agencies, most of these agencies, if not all of them, have archaeologists on staff. So that's pretty easy to get approved by the staff archaeologist and SHPO if we have that sign off from the archaeologist on staff.
So to give you an example, I think there's an example coming up of this.
Yeah, I think there's examples of all of them, yeah. And next up, we have the law enforcement opportunity. These are open to law enforcement agencies only, federal, state, local, tribal law enforcement agencies. Again, all of these are going to be on a reimbursement basis or a setup where we would pay the contractor directly. Law enforcement grants are up to $100,000, currently require a 5% match and have a 2-year time frame with bi-monthly reporting. This program has seen a lot of interest lately, and we're working as a team to kind of look at these guidelines for this program. So this is all subject to change related to law enforcement specifically, just given the recent interest and a lot of discussion with our boards and commissions regarding this program. But these would have to go through our full boards and commissions review process, and again, are only open to law enforcement agencies.
And just to clarify, bi-monthly is every other month and
Yep.
not multiple times per month. I really need to fix that in the slide. My apologies.
And the last program we have under our supplemental umbrella is for signage grants. This has been around, 4 years now, Mickey? And I don't think we've had one application for it. This is, again, designed for us to approve at the staff level, us to pay contractors directly, and then, utilize volunteer time to get out and install them. But up to $10,000 requires a 5% match and a 1-year completion. This is open to nonprofits, tribal agencies, local, county, town, federal, state, so on. Primarily designed for education and information panels, trail signage, trail markers, trail decals, those types of things. And these too can be approved at the staff level. and have not seen one submittal. One thing to note, you can have a competitive off-highway vehicle grant and a supplemental grant open at the same time. However, if your competitive grant has signage included in it, you couldn't also pursue another signage grant to do additional signage. So that's kind of one stipulation there.
So this is just for motorized grants. We've had people ask us for non-motorized trails. It's only for motorized trails.
Currently, we don't, the fire and EMS are not eligible to apply, only law enforcement agencies. Unfortunately, we're not utilizing the off-highway vehicle recreation fund dollars for search and rescue, fire, or EMS at this time, just because we'd have, I mean, that would eat up every single dollar we had if that got out. So primarily designed for increasing support facility access, providing OHV-specific law enforcement efforts, and improving OHV recreation opportunities is what the fund is designed for. So I apologize, Brian, on that one. Here's some examples, some photos there. You have top right, we did a dust mitigation project along I-17, just south of Rock Springs Cafe with Bureau of Land Management to do dust mitigation. On the left there, you see some fencing near a staging area. Obviously, the purchase of vehicles for OHV enforcement and education opportunities. Top left, you have cleanup. We do lots of stuff with natural restorations, Tread Lightly, Tonto Recreation Alliance for cleanups and education. So just a few examples of some of the successful projects we have.
Matt, I know, again, that was a lot of information, but are there any questions on any of our kind of motorized focused programs?
I'm going to add one thing. So if you have a non-motorized trail in community and it's getting damaged by OHV use, we can use OHV dollars to mitigate the damage on these non-motorized trails. So that's something, if a community is being, the trail system or their property is being damaged by OHV, illegal OHV use, we can help mitigate that, to prevent that from happening.
Yeah. And I should have probably elaborated a little bit more, but also if there's cultural sites or wildlife habitat that are being negatively impacted by the off-highway vehicle community, that would fall under the emergency mitigation efforts as well. I was recently in conversation with some folks on the Tonto where wildlife water access is being negatively impacted, so we're going to be possibly looking at that for a mitigation opportunity for fencing. So, yeah, lots of different opportunities available with our umbrella for OHV use.
I don't see any more questions in the chat, so we'll go ahead and keep moving forward. So our next opportunity is the Land and Water Conservation Fund, which was established to assist federal, state, and local governments in the acquisition and development of public outdoor recreation facilities. The program is administered at the federal level by the National Park Service. Again, eligibility federal, state, county, local, tribal, as well as schools. School districts are eligible to apply. Nonprofits are not eligible for this opportunity. Now, nonprofits can work with one of these eligible agencies to kind of develop the application, but they're not eligible to be the actual applying agency. Works on a reimbursement basis. Currently, we're allowing requests up to $500,000. So you'll see the match here is a little bit different. This is a 50% match or a 1-to-1 dollar for dollar match. Match can come in all varieties, cash, labor, materials, and there are a few other grants that can be used to match. Time frame to complete these projects is 3 years, and that is from the National Park Service award date. You'll see there's a lot of additional information for this program. A lot of stipulations surrounding this funding. The first is that the applicant agreed to a project area boundary. This boundary actually must remain open to outdoor recreation, public outdoor recreation in perpetuity. We actually do come out and we inspect these sites on a 5-year rolling basis. Once the project is complete, you are required to display an acknowledgement sign where the funding came from. We actually have those signs. We will send those out to you free of charge. So basically, when your project is complete, we'll mail you out a sign, and that sign needs to be present on that site. The priorities for this program are based on the State Comprehensive Outdoor Recreation Plan, the SCORP, and the Trails Plan. Currently getting ready to send off the most recent up-to-date SCORP to the governor's office and then to the National Park Service. So the scoring criteria are going to be changing a little bit, but as soon as that is through the review and approval process, we will post that on our website. And then anybody applying for Land and Water Conservation Fund, we will make sure that you know where that document is and how to kind of use that document to complete your application.
We'll be updating our application related to the priorities. Some of them have changed, so we'll be updating the application to show those criteria and the point value of those criteria.
If you plan to do work on land that is leased from a federal entity, you need to make sure that there are 25 or more years remaining on the lease. That's a federal requirement of the program. We've run into that issue a few times now. So this program also requires a 4.4% surcharge, which is on top of the funding request. You're also required to follow the Buy American, Build America standards. So basically all of the steel used in this project needs to be certified, manufactured in America.
So with the Buy America, Build America, it's related to infrastructure. So things we know positively, any bridges or any sewer systems or water systems, all those components need to be built in America.
So I discussed the project area boundary. So this is kind of an example of what our project area boundary maps look like. And we'll work with you prior to actually sending this along to the National Park Service for review and approval. Kind of just an example, and you might not be able to see it too well, but there's a red area surrounding these tennis courts. That's actually the area that's encumbered by this program, and that's the area that must remain open to the public for outdoor recreation in perpetuity. That is the boundary we come out every 5 years and inspect to ensure that it is. So again, we'll work with you prior to the application being reviewed and approved and kind of come to an agreement on what this boundary is and what this boundary will be moving forward. Similar to the Land and Water Conservation Fund, we also have the Local, Regional, and State Parks Program, LRSP program, which basically same eligibility, same activities are eligible under this program as the Land and Water Conservation Fund. Again, it's a state program, so it's not open to federal applicants. State, county, local, and tribal governments are eligible to apply. Works on a reimbursement basis. Maximum request for this program, $250,000. Required match is, again, 50%, dollar for dollar. Time frame to complete these projects between 2.5 and 3 years, and again, requires quarterly status reports. These projects are reviewed by the State Historic Preservation Office and not the National Park Service. So again, these can be reviewed, approved, and work begun much quicker than the Land and Water Conservation Fund.
So as Jeff said, the LWCF program and the LRSP program both require a 1-to-1 match. So the LRSP program can match the LWCF program, and it's probably our most popular, most competitive funding program we have besides the historic preservation grants. This one, we're getting a huge amount of interest in the local regional state park heritage fund program.
Again, we had a lot of questions on scoring, and this slide isn't extremely useful in answering those questions. But this is the current scoring criteria that are used for both Land and Water Conservation Fund and the LRSP. Again, these are going to be changing shortly with the approval of the updated score. So we'll certainly keep all interested applicants informed on when those scoring changes are actually in effect. But that document will be posted on our website under the Publications tab, and again, we'll direct you towards that once it's approved. Another very diverse funding opportunity, really any type of facilities, features, amenities you could imagine within a standard city, county, local park. All of those things would be eligible. Shade structures, grills, trash cans, picnic tables, any type of court, basketball, tennis, a lot of pickleball recently. Any of the infrastructure in the park, we can assist with that. Standard old school playgrounds. Again, courts, anything associated with the courts, nets, lighting, pools, any pumps, slides, any of the amenities around or in the pool would be eligible. Bottom left one is a skate park. Bottom right, I believe that is a restroom shower facility at one of the Maricopa County regional parks. Those types of things, all eligible. Any fields, ball fields, dugouts, again, lighting, courts, restrooms, development of new parks is also an eligible expense. Again, another skate park, I think, top left, a pump track, traditional playground, and another one we've seen a lot of recently is the splash pads. Any questions on Land and Water Conservation Fund or local, regional, and state park funding? All right, we're almost through this. Looks like Satara had to dip out, so we'll fill in for her historic preservation portion. But the next program we will discuss is the Outdoor Recreation Legacy Partnership Program, ORLP program. This is kind of, I guess, a supplemental program to the Land and Water Conservation Fund. This is kind of, it's similar eligible activities, but it's kind of on a national, it's almost a national competition. So the purpose of this program is to provide grants to acquire and develop public lands for outdoor recreation, consistent with the purposes of LWCF, but with further specific goals of funding projects that are located within or serve an urbanized area with a population of 30,000 or more, and are located in or directly accessible to neighborhoods or communities that are underserved in terms of parks and recreation resources. And again, if you look under the additional information, we expand a little bit more on that underserved population. In terms of this program, underserved is defined as no existing parks or some existing parks, but not enough to support the size of the population of the service area or satisfy the existing recreational demand. Federal, they're not eligible to apply for this, are they? Yeah, that's incorrect. This is only eligible state, county, local, tribal governments. Don't believe schools are eligible to apply either. This works on a reimbursement basis. The maximum request, this is a big one. It is not 5, it is up to $10 million. So by far the largest request that we have. Again, just like the traditional state side land and water conservation fund, requires a dollar for dollar match. And you have 3 years to complete this, the on-the-ground work from the date the National Park Service awards the project.
So one thing we talked about match. So that for the federal programs, the most part, you can't match federal money with federal money. The LWCF program, you can match and the ORLAP program, you can match it with CDBG funds, you can match it with recreational trails funds, and you could match it with American Rescue Revenue Recovery Fund. So if your community got revenue recovery fund from the ARPA program, you can use that as match for these LWCF programs.
This slide we have up right now is all of these locations, all of these agencies would be eligible to apply for ORLP based solely on the population eligibility requirements. There are a few additional stipulations that we need to do additional research on. They have to be located, the community being targeted has to be located in one of the eligible census tracts, which we have actually gone in and kind of pulled out. So if you work for one of these agencies, one of these municipalities, if you're interested in this funding, feel free to reach out. We can let you know what portions of your city would be eligible for this funding. And then we can also kind of work with you to see if it meets any of the other eligibility, all the other eligibility requirements. We plan to do another workshop focused just on this funding opportunity. We don't have a date for that yet, but we will do our best to reach out to somebody from all of these municipalities just to make them aware. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to Mickey or myself about this program.
They asked about the ARPA funds. Yes, it's only revenue replacement funding to be used as match.
All right, we're almost there, I promise. I know it's a lot of opportunities, but we do have a lot of money. So the next program is the State Lake Improvement Fund, the SLIP program. Eligible projects must directly relate to bodies of water that allow motorized boat use. Projects can include the development of new boat launches, support facilities, marking buoys, watercraft, trailers, radios, lights, first aid equipment. Eligibility, game and fish, as well as county, local, and tribal governmental agencies. Again, reimbursement basis, the maximum request for this program is $800,000. This program does not require any match, though if an applying agency does provide match, that will increase the score of the application. Time frame to complete these is 3 years. And if you have any questions on this program, you can reach out to either Mickey or myself.
For the most part, on the SLIP program, or all our programs, you can't apply for additional funding until a project is complete. So I think we had 10 projects awarded last year. 7 were purchased boats. Because of the supply chain issues and manufacturing issues, there are going to be major delays in getting those boats. So those communities that applied last year for a boat can reapply this year to make improvements to some of their facilities related to the body of water that these boats are allowed to. So this is one of the exceptions to the rule. You can apply for funding even though your current project isn't closed.
And Mickey, can you clarify that this funding cannot be used for staffing?
That's correct. It can be used for staffing.
We've gotten that question more frequently, similar to the law enforcement grant on the motorized side, which can be used to kind of support that those overtime and staffing, this program cannot be used for that. It is for the actual purchase of equipment or the actual development of facilities on one of these lakes that allow motorized use.
So Nancy's asking, can you define shovel-ready?
Yeah, so in terms of our trail projects, LRSP, LWCF projects, that basically means that the project is designed, that all the permits are already in place, and if, well, any archaeological or cultural surveys are already completed, and if required, any NEPA work is already done. That's kind of what we mean by shovel-ready, at least in terms of most of our programs.
Can SLIP be used to repair existing facilities previously funded by SLIP? The answer to that is yes, it can. In this program, we came close, but we have $4 million in this program. And so far, we had one grant that was submitted, so there's plenty of money in this program also.
Any other questions on the SLIP grant? Again, pretty clear eligibility requirements, and eligible activities. I think the Game and Fish Department was recently approved a grant to improve a boat launch at, Parker Canyon Lake down south. I know we already approved an application from Maricopa County, I believe Maricopa County Parks and Rec, to install a new wind warning system at Lake Pleasant. I know we've approved a handful of applications for the purchase of new boats. What was that, Mickey, 7?
7 out of 10 were for new boats.
Yeah, we've been doing a lot of those recently. So really, any facilities, restrooms, first aid facilities, docks, boat launches, ramps, on lakes or rivers that allow motorized boat use, those are eligible expenses. All right, moving on. The State Historic Preservation Grant. Again, unfortunately, Satara had to leave before we got to this, so we will do our best to fill in her absence. Please just don't ask any super detailed questions, because we won't do well with those. But we can certainly pass them along to Satara. We can send along her contact information as well, which I think she already put in the chat. But so eligible projects must directly involve resources listed in the Arizona or National Register of Historic Places, or be determined eligible for listing by the State Historic Preservation Office, by our SHPO. Eligible applicants, state, county, local, tribal governments, schools, and nonprofits are also eligible to apply. This also works on a reimbursement basis. Max request for this program is $150,000. This requires a 40% match, and the time frame to complete is 3 years. And there is Satara's contact information on the bottom, and we have it in a couple of other slides, so don't feel like you need to scribble it down real quick.
She threw it in the chat as well,
Yeah.
so you can copy her little note there as well.
So unlike our grants, we're accepted on a rolling basis, SHPO is going to bring these to the board on a quarterly basis. So I think the first project they're going to bring to the board is in December. So these aren't done on a quarterly. These aren't done on a monthly basis. They're done on a quarterly basis.
I won't go through these line for line. I'll just leave this slide up for a second. It shows some examples of eligible planning activities are eligible under this grant, which not a lot of our other funding opportunities cover planning. So certainly take note of that. Just some examples of eligible projects, eligible brick and mortar type projects, and some examples of ineligible activities. And then here are the scoring criteria. And if anybody wants additional information on that, we can certainly send that along. few examples of how this funding is being used or has been used, really to maintain historic structures that are on or eligible for either the Arizona or National Register of Historic Places. And I believe the preparation of an application to be included on the National or Arizona Register are eligible expenses for this program. Keep that in mind. If the site or structure is not already on the list, it is required, if you're applying for this funding, that you begin that process.
Did we answer, I don't know if what type of ARPA funds can be used? Was under the impression that they could only be used, okay, I wasn't sure.
Revenue replacement.
Sorry.
Funding, the only funding to be used as match.
So next, we have our American Rescue Plan Act funds. Mickey, do you mind covering this one?
Sure. So last year, we were given $5 million in ARPA funding. It's exactly different. In the same category as the Heritage Fund. So loosely for historic preservation, for LRSP, for trails, and for environmental education. So it's state, county, municipal nonprofits are eligible, and tribal governments are eligible with this program. It's a reimbursement grant. The requested amount, depending on what the project is, if it's an LRSP project, can be up to $500,000. Historic preservation, $250,000. Trails up to $100,000. Environmental education up to $100,000. So this funding has to be obligated by December 31st. So applications we'll need before the end of this month to bring to the board to obligate the remaining funds. I believe we have around $800,000 left, and we have a few that are currently in the queue to be submitted. So the preference will be given to communities that are within a qualified census tract area. And you have to define how COVID impacted your project. So all these projects have to have some impact by COVID, and certainly reach out to us if you have questions on eligibility for the American Rescue Plan Act funding.
And regarding the qualified census tracts, we have a link that I think HUD is responsible for maintaining with a map. So we can send that along, and you can determine if the tract would be considered eligible.
So the heating, ventilation, and air conditioning, we got $1 million in this program. I believe there's around $400,000 left. Local tribal nonprofits, it's a reimbursement grant up to $200,000. It doesn't require any match. It must be completed within 1 year. And the building where the units are going to be installed must be on the Arizona National Register of Historic Places. And again, it has to be related to COVID. You just can't ask for additional funding for air conditioning unit for office because yours is getting old. It has to be related to COVID. And most of the justification we're getting is they're getting these new units with super fine filters and UV lighting to prevent future spread of the virus during future pandemics. So that's basically what the program is for, and has been funded. The project is funded to date.
And just the HVAC scoring criteria for you really quickly. Certainly score better for new systems. I believe the location it's more geared towards rural communities. A rural area will score higher than a building or structure in a more urbanized area.
This is a simplified application. This one's not one of the more complicated applications.
All right, so we've reached way past the halfway point. Come back. We're going to take about a 5-minute break. We'll come back. We'll discuss some of the policies of the program. We'll discuss some common mistakes that folks make during the application process. And then we'll give you some tips for submitting and administering a successful application, and then we'll leave some time for some questions at the end. So my clock shows 11:19 right now, so we'll go ahead and get started again at 11:25. All right, everybody, my clock shows 11:25, so we'll go ahead and get started again. We actually have a question in the chat. So, what if historic site doesn't have HVAC units?
Well, I mean, if you can show that the HVAC unit, combats something related to COVID, it has to be related to COVID. If you put an HVAC unit in a historic place that never had it before, you have to define why you want it as it relates to COVID. Whether it's lost revenue, whether it's healthy air or anything like that.
So we'll just go ahead and run through some of the policies, requirements, some of the stipulations of just all of our grants in general. So the first one we'll talk about is some non-eligible costs. Food and beverages are not eligible. Water is eligible, but we've had folks actually try and get alcohol reimbursed, which certainly not an eligible expense. Landscaping and irrigation. So when we mention landscaping, we're talking more kind of ornamental, decorative landscaping. Irrigation for fields is eligible under the Land and Water Conservation Fund, but in general, like installing irrigation lines would not be eligible for any of our other opportunities.
They call it like beautification.
Yeah. Which LWCF will pay for some, but that would be something we'd discuss with you during our pre-site inspection.
I don't know if did we mention that? So any LRFP, LWCF program project require Jeff and myself to come do a site visit. So before we start an application, Jeff and I will have a virtual meeting with you, make sure it's eligible, and then Jeff and I will travel anywhere in the state to look at your project and go over it in detail, and then follow up with a inspection report at the end and the next steps.
So the development of local or regional plans, we've discussed that one a couple of times today. Administrative or overhead costs associated with the actual preparation of the application are not eligible. Operation and maintenance of existing trails, parks, is not eligible, but you can apply to maintain existing parks, existing trails. Any costs incurred prior to the project approval, costs associated with design and engineering are not eligible for reimbursement without prior approval. So what state off-highway vehicle can support some design and engineering? I know Land and Water Conservation Fund, I believe those are only two programs that will support those types of activities, but they need to be in your application when it goes through the advisory committee and board review and approval process.
Want to piggyback too, Jeff, on prior to project approval, we also don't want to see any expenditures really outside of your agreement timeframe or your period of performance. So we've also had projects where there have been invoices or work completed after the project end date, and they tried to submit reimbursements for those. Those are also ineligible expenses. So really, before or after, or basically outside of your period of performance, those expenses would be ineligible, and yeah.
So we just went through an audit, and that was one of the things they wanted to define period of performance. For the most part, we had all expenses were within that time frame when the agreement was signed. Some of the questions we get asked at the end of the project period is, can we pay for the materials or equipment now and get it later? So you can't technically pay for the equipment before you receive, at least not the full amount. You can put deposits down, but if you're going to get this equipment and pay the invoice after the project period ends, it's not eligible.
Any costs associated with environmental assessments and archaeological data recovery activities beyond preliminary reviews and surveys are not eligible. Again, Land and Water Conservation Fund can help pay for some of these cultural archaeological surveys, but if any additional work, any, as it says, data recovery, that would not be eligible. Any projects on routes or trails that are not approved by the appropriate land managing agency or a private landowner will also not be funded. So that's a big issue. We need to have the land manager's approval when you're submitting this application.
So we got a question about SLIP, about fixing a boat ramp, and it looks like you're talking about the body of water is gonna be drawn down, and you can do the improvements. So if we get this by the end of November, it could go to the board in December, and they could approve it as long as SHPO approves all the work. And then you can use the funds. And I'm assuming, if you wanna speak up, if I'm miscommunicating this, like, does that mean the next 5 years is the next time the area will be drawn down? I'm not exactly sure what the question's asking.
Brian, do you have a way to chime in?
So they only lower the water level?
It sounds like.
Yeah, every 5 years.
Have you guys met with Brian already on a project? Okay. So I would say, yeah, definitely get in touch with us, Brian, so we can get working on a SLIP project for you. Sounds like.
So control and tenure. Projects must have adequate control of the project sites to construct, operate, and maintain the areas for the term required by the program and the project agreement. As we mentioned a couple of times, for land and water conservation, that is in perpetuity. So control and tenure may be documented in several ways, including fee title, land ownership, a lease, some type of use agreement, or an easement. So we discussed this a couple of times. The land manager approval letter is the document identifying that authority has been received from that entity to make the proposed improvements. If you are doing work on land that you do not own, we will not process the application. We will not move it along in the review and approval process until we have a letter from the land manager saying they're aware of and supportive of the work that you intend to do on their property. So expenditures. In order to remain active, projects must remain active during any 6-month period. Really, activity is just purchasing, making some type of purchase, submitting a reimbursement request. Again, this can be as little as a shovel or a couple of pieces of equipment. If you're doing work in the Phoenix area, trail work in the Phoenix area, have some plans to make some equipment purchases during the kind of off-season when you won't be out there doing any work in the field, just to make sure that your project remains active and you do not lose your funds. I know ADOT has been looking at that more and more, looking at what projects are not active and potentially basically pulling those funds from that project. So we don't want that to happen, so please make sure you're keeping your project active.
There is an exception to that. Like I said, the SLIP program, the boats that were ordered, all the boats have been ordered, and they've been told they have to wait. Or if it's UTV, sometimes it's gonna take longer than 6 months to go, to get those things. Those are certainly an exception to this 6-month rule.
Another big thing is progress reports. So just be familiar with your project agreement. Like we talked about earlier, there's a lot of different opportunities. There's a lot of different mechanisms for status reporting. Your project agreement will outline that. but most are gonna operate on a quarterly basis. That means that the report is due the last day of the month for that quarter. So January 1st to March 31st, that status report is due March 31st, not a month later. That used to be the old policy, but it's due the last day of that quarter. With the status reports, that was also part of the audit findings. There was 200 and some that were, 260 that were overdue. So now, with status reporting, if your organization has an active project that has overdue status reports, we're now utilizing that to withhold reimbursement claims. So if you have another department within your organization or another regional branch or another district ranger office or field office that is delayed on their projects, it will now impact your projects as well. So as an accountability measure, we're having, if your project has any overdue status reports, it's gonna hold up your entire agency's reimbursement process, agreement process, application review. We have an organization right now that's working on an application that won't even be submitted for review until one of their other folks have caught up on their status report. So that was a big finding with the audit, so bear that in mind. They don't take long. We're happy to meet with you. We're happy to help you through that process of reviewing those status reports and submitting them. It's not difficult, but it is a huge, huge part now of the accountability factor with getting these dollars, so.
So as soon as your project's approved, I don't know if you mentioned this,
Yeah.
we set these up. So before you got a note, we told you it had to be done by the end of the quarter. You go in, you create a status report. Now, staff has created status reports for all these projects. So you're gonna get a notification from our online system that the status report is due. That way we can go in as staff, see which ones are overdue at the end of the quarter. So that's this is probably one of the biggest changes we made in the program in the last 3 or 4 months due to the audit. It was a huge audit finding.
Yeah, I think there was a lot of confusion from applicants in terms of what the report periods were and when those due dates were. So as we mentioned, in an effort to kind of take away any questions, any uncertainty, we go ahead and once your project is approved, we go ahead and schedule those out for you. And we will be, now that we have the staff in place, we will be holding additional workshops with anybody who has a project approved in active grants, where we kind of discuss how to submit these status reports and how to properly submit a reimbursement claim and the types of materials that are required with those claims. So if you have an active grant, you will be hearing from us at some point soon
So as Matt says, if it seems difficult for you to get these reports done, we will sit down with you, do a online virtual meeting. We can do it during the day, we can do it at night, we can do it on weekends, whatever works for you to get these status reports done. And we have over 200 active projects now, and now we have to report to our state parks board on a quarterly basis on all of our projects. So we're using these status reports to report the progress of all these projects to the board.
Yeah, we obviously can't get out there and monitor these projects in person. So these status reports are really how we keep informed to how your project is going. So very important to us.
Another thing that we have going on is procurement standards. So if you're a nonprofit, which we've seen a lot recently, you would be required to adhere to the state procurement policies. Typically, it relates to any purchases or activities over $10,000, making sure that you obtain quotes. So even when you're applying, what we will see from time to time is a project sponsor will name a specific company that's going to be doing the work for the project. You can't do that. Now, obviously, federal, state, county, the other municipality types, if you have your procurement standards, you follow those. You can adhere to those, And if that allows you to name a contractor prior to applying for the grant, that's fine. But typically, at least on the nonprofit front, you're gonna have to adhere to state procurement standards. You would have to get 3 quotes, depending on the purchase price. And that would have to be documented within your reporting process and your reimbursement process, within the grant, is kind of what this is talking about here.
And that documentation should also be kept on hand in case of an audit. Insurance.
So all of our grants require insurance. If you're a federal agency or municipality, your insurance should cover, what's required, which is up on the screen. If you are a nonprofit, you're gonna be required to get this insurance, even if it's not ground disturbing. So all of our projects require insurance, and this insurance is an eligible expense for your grant. So if you're gonna get insurance, if you don't have your insurance, you can put that into the grant itself, and we can reimburse you for that cost. And generally, for nonprofits, we find it's between $1,500 and $2,000 a year.
Again, which can be paid for using grant funds, so keep that in mind. So we'll go ahead and talk about some common issues that we continue to run into, that we've seen more of recently. First has to do with budgets. You'll see this top little table says parking lot. That's kind of an example of what we usually get. Below it, that's more what we're looking for when you're completing your budget in the online grant system. We need a little bit more detail than just a parking lot. We need some more specifics. So just kind of comparison of what we usually see and what we need to see. Also, once these are approved by the board and the advisory committee, you cannot be moving around these budgets. It is what it is after it's approved. Now, if you need to shift costs between already approved scope items, please let us know. We can kind of help you work through that. Don't do that without us knowing, because that'll just create all sorts of issues in the system and just with tracking the application. Again, we understand things are a little more expensive right now than they have been, so we ask that you kind of build in that contingency into your budget. If you need more funding, let us know. We can amend your agreement to increase the award amount, but please don't do it without our notice. Don't start shifting around these costs. And once it's approved, let us know of any changes, regardless of how minor you think they are. Another common issue has to do with our NEPA documentation. Really, NEPA is not necessarily required unless it's required by the specific land managing agency. So if you're doing work on, U.S. Forest Service lands, any of those major undertakings require a NEPA study, survey, report to be completed. So that's really one of the big determining factors of if NEPA is needed or not. In general, all of our projects are basically categorically excluded from a full-blown NEPA process based on their activities. So really, for your application, at least to start, all we really need for any state-funded projects, we need you to go in and complete the Arizona Game and Fish Environmental Review Report, which basically you'll just basically identify the limits of your project, submit those, and it's an automated tool. It'll spit you out a report about 5 minutes later. Follow any guidelines provided on that report. For any federally funded projects, we ask that you complete the U.S. Fish and Wildlife IPAC tool. There's the link to that is on this slide. Basically, it's the same thing. You'll complete the tool, you'll identify the limits, you'll kind of discuss some of your activities that are associated with the project. And then not long after, the tool will basically provide a report with a reference number. So you're required to provide an official species list that is can be exported after you complete this tool. That list will have project reference number on it. We haven't run into this too often, but if during the review of your project, NPS requests additional consultation with U.S. Fish and Wildlife, we basically already have that project reference number. You'll pull out that letter, the official species list, you'll pull up that reference number, and then you'll reach out to U.S. Fish and Wildlife using that reference number. We've had that a couple of times, and NPS has requested additional consultation. We've reached out to U.S. Fish and Wildlife after that request from National Park Service, and they basically just gave us the green light to move forward with that process. They didn't have any concerns with any threatened, endangered species in the area or any environmental resources. So that's generally about the extent of our NEPA consultation. Another major issue we have is with the Cultural Clearance Review Form, the CCRF. The purpose of this form is to determine the effect, if any, a project may have on significant archaeological and/or historical cultural resources. If your agency has an archaeologist on staff, go ahead and get them involved as early as possible. It'll certainly make your life a lot easier. If you do not have an archaeologist on staff, please let us know. SHPO, as well as the State Museum, maintain a list of qualified, permitted archaeologists. So if you want that information, just let us know. We can send it along. If you're unsure if a project area has been surveyed, you can feel free to reach out directly to me. I can do a little bit of background research on your behalf and let you know at least if a survey has been done, and if one has been done, if it identified any archaeological or cultural resources in the project area. Again, we kind of take this on a case-by-case basis, but if we determine your project has not been surveyed, we will likely ask you to conduct one prior to us sending this over to ADOT or SHPO for approval. Costs associated with conducting the resource survey are eligible if pre-approved for the Land and Water Conservation Fund. So keep that in mind. If you're applying for LWCF funds, as long as you have that in your original application, we can reimburse you for any of that work.
And like Jeff said, we highly recommend, if you don't have a current survey for an LWCF project, that's one of the biggest, because these have to go through tribal consultation. So there's a lot of, they're always asking if the survey's been done. And if it's not, you may be required to monitor it, and that's gonna add another several $1,000s to your project that wasn't in your budget.
Yeah, right now, for any of these LWCF projects, I would say they need to be surveyed prior to us sending them along to National Park Service. Either that, or they are previously developed and we're able to get SHPO to basically sign off that no additional information is going to be gained by surveying that property anymore. All right, so we are almost done. So just a few tips from us. Before you reach out to us, we're more than happy to speak with you about eligibility. If you have an idea for a project, you can reach out to us, let us know. We'll tell you if we think it would be eligible or not. But It certainly helps to have somewhat of a plan in place before you reach out to us. Again, we enjoy talking about this stuff with you and what would be eligible and what you could do with this funding, but it really helps if you already have somewhat of a plan in place. Reach out to us as soon as you're thinking about this funding or applying for this funding. Depending on what program you're applying for, it can be a really long process. So certainly reach out to us if you have questions, and certainly start as soon as possible. Again, it can take a while to kind of gather all of this required documentation, so we certainly recommend that you start as soon as possible. We are all available, so if you have any questions, we'll kind of identify probably the best person for each type of question at the end of this. But if you have any questions, don't wait till later in the process. Just go ahead and reach out to us, and we will try and get back to you as quickly as possible with a response and resolve any potential issues. Attend workshops. You've already taken this step. We will be doing additional workshops. I think the next one where we talk about all of our funding is in December. As Matt mentioned, all of our workshops are posted on our website following the meeting, so you can go ahead and check that out as well. All of our workshops do vary slightly. We forget things during one that we remember during another, so you always kind of experience something different. And our funding opportunities, the amount of funding we have available is always changing, so we usually have some new information during each workshop. So,
And we always get lots of questions that weren't asked before, so that's a good thing we answer all these questions, which is for every single workshop we do.
yeah, definitely get new questions each time, so they're always a little bit different. So if you've been to previous workshops or you've been to this workshop, don't feel like you don't or can't attend future ones, because you will hear some different information. Provide required documentation in a timely manner. We will either request additional information or clarification, or it will be requested of us through the reviewing parties, SHPO, ADOT, National Park Service. Don't shoot the messenger. We're really just trying to move these applications along. So if we reach out to you requesting additional information, clarification, just try and provide it to us as quickly as possible. It's really taking a while to get this information back to us just increases the time it takes for your application to make it through the review and approval process. Get others involved. Some of these applications can be pretty in-depth. So as I mentioned, if you have a biologist on staff, if you have an archaeologist on staff, get them involved. It'll certainly make your lives much easier. Be consistent throughout your application. Inconsistency is a quick way to get your application kicked back to you, either by us or by the reviewing parties. If you say you're going to do 1 mile of work on Trail A, make sure those numbers and that trail name remain consistent throughout. If they are not, that will be noticed, and then we will be reaching out for additional clarification. And then finally, keep it simple. We like to hear the history and some more detail about some of these projects, but with the amounts that we review, it really helps us to just keep it simple, keep it direct and to the point. We don't need to know a lot of the background information of how this project came to be or the history of a specific project. Really just kind of tell us the who, what, where, when, why, and how of the current project. There we go. Our next workshop where we discuss all of our funding opportunities is December 22nd between 10 a.m. and 11:30 a.m. That information will be posted on our website. We will also be posting this workshop on there as soon as the recording is sent to us and we're able to kind of do some post-processing on it. I think before that, we'll probably do another post-approval workshop, and Mickey and I will definitely be doing another ORLP, Outdoor Recreation Legacy Partnership Program workshop. But that'll be a little more targeted for folks who are actually eligible. Again, all of our contact information and kind of who the appropriate contact for specific questions may be. Again, if you have any questions just in general on any of our programs, really, you can reach out to any of us and we will work to point you in the right direction or make sure the most appropriate contact is kind of looped into that. All just general questions, Mickey is the best resource. Anything motorized, Matt is your guy. Anything non-motorized, anything having to do with our online system, web grants, or anything having to do with kind of the NEPA or cultural portions of the application, feel free to reach out to me. Anything regarding the historic preservation grant, Satara is the best contact for that. And once your applications are kind of underway, we start dealing with the agreement process as well as the claims, reimbursements, and status reports. Alec is definitely your man for those questions. We will leave this up for a couple of minutes. We're gonna go ahead and put ourselves on mute. That is all we have. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. We'll hang out for a little while, so if you want to drop any more questions in the chat, feel free. We'll go ahead and respond to those. Or if you just want to take yourself off mute and ask us audibly, you can go ahead and do that as well. But thanks again, everybody, for joining us, and look forward to hearing from you and working with you.
I don't think one final point, I don't think we mentioned this, so we have a total of almost $19 million available in all the grants, so we're certainly looking forward to getting an application.
Thanks again, everybody.